Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was a member of the Phantom Troupe in Hunter x Hunter. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the abandoned cathedral was thick with the scent of dust, decaying stone, and something else, the faint, metallic tang of old gold and the crisp, papery smell of ancient manuscripts. Light struggled through the shattered stained-glass rose window, casting a kaleidoscope of fractured colors across the cavernous space. Piles of treasure, the spoils of a dozen heists, lay in opulent disarray, chests overflowing with jewels, priceless works of art leaning against crumbling pews, and stacks of gold ingots that served as makeshift stools. This was not a lair, it was a nest, woven from the plundered dreams of the world. In the center of this chaotic hoard, a boy of 16 knelt on the cold flagstones. He was small for his age, with a wiry frame lost in the loose black trousers and simple tank top he wore. A wild mop of dark green hair, so dark it was nearly black in the dim light, fell across his brow, shadowing eyes of a shockingly vibrant emerald. His face was a constellation of freckles, a canvas of boyish innocence that was utterly at odds with his surroundings. And on his back, stark against his pale skin, was a tattoo of a spider, its body marked with the number 14. His name, the only one he'd known since he was a child, was Deku. In his hands he held a silver locket, no bigger than his thumb, intricately carved with the image of a weeping angel. He wasn't admiring it. He was studying it. 16th century Pedanian silverwork, he muttered, his voice a low, rapid hum that was almost lost in the vastness of the nave. The filigree is too delicate for the period, suggests a later restoration, possibly by a less skilled artisan. But the clasp mechanism, that's original. A pressure point release, almost impossible to find without knowing the sequence. Not meant to be opened by force. A secret then? A memento, not just a piece of jewelry. Value isn't in the material, it's in the sentiment. Probably contains a lock of hair or a miniature portrait. Sentimental value is useless for resale, but the craftsmanship of the lock, that could be replicated. Useful for future acquisitions. He turned it over and over, his green eyes scanning every millimeter of its surface. This was his role. While others in their troupe were the muscle, the assassins, the strategists, he was the analyst, the appraiser, the one who saw the hidden stories in the things they stole. It was a quiet, unassuming role that suited his temperament. It kept him out of the bloodier aspects of their work. Most of the time, a shadow fell over him. Still whispering to the junk Deku? Deku flinched, the locket nearly slipping from his grasp. He looked up to see Finks looming over him, a perpetual scowl etched onto his face. The tall, tracksuited man cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing like gunshots in the silence. I was just assessing its value, Finks, Deku stammered, his analytical confidence evaporating into his usual nervousness. It's silver. We melt it down. That's its value, Finks grunted, kicking at a pile of golden goblets. This is all taking too long. The boss wants this place cleared out before dawn. There's a new piece that needs space. He jerked a thumb towards the cathedral's entrance, where a colossal marble statue of a knight on horseback, easily 12 feet tall and weighing several tons, was currently wedged, half in and half out. It had been the centerpiece of a city museum an hour ago. We can't just shove it, came another voice, dry and bored. Shizuku, her large glasses perched on her nose, sat atop a pile of Persian rugs, reading a book. Blinky can't inhale something she can't see the entirety of, and it's too big to fit through the door in one piece. Nobunaga, who had been meditating in a cross-legged position with his Ieto across his lap, opened one eye. Then we break it. Its purpose is to be an obstacle to our enemies, not to us. No, a calm voice commanded from the shadows of the altar. Every head turned. Krala Lucifer emerged into a sliver of light, a book in his hand. He was dressed in his usual dark coat with the St. Peter's cross emblazoned on the back. His face was a mask of serene intellect, his dark eyes holding a depth that seemed to absorb the light around them. When he spoke, everyone listened. The artist died completing that statue, Krala said, his voice soft but resonant. He carved his own heart into the marble, or so the legend goes. To shatter it would be to shatter a piece of human history. It would be an insult to the craft. We are thieves, not vandals. We appreciate beauty, we don't destroy it. Finks grumbled but fell silent. Crollo's word was law. Then how do we move it, boss? Franklin asked, his massive form making the floorboards groan. Crollo's gaze swept over his assembled spiders, landing finally on the small, green-haired boy still kneeling on the floor. Deku, he said, and the boy's head snapped up, his attention total. You've been recovering. Are you well enough? Deku swallowed hard, a knot of dread and duty tightening in his stomach. He nodded, pushing himself to his feet. Yes, boss. I'm fine. Good, Crollo said with a faint, almost imperceptible smile. Move it to the north transept. Be gentle. A wave of varied reactions washed over the group. Finks and Phaeton, who was perched like a gargoyle on a high beam, shared a look of grim utility. They saw Deku not as a person, but as a crowbar, a living demolition tool. Maki, leaning against a pillar and idly winding nin threads around her fingers, watched with a cool, appraising gaze, her eyes narrowed slightly in pragmatic concern. Shaunurk, ever cheerful, gave Deku a thumbs up. Go for it, Deku! Just try not to break yourself this time. Deku's hands trembled. He hated this. He hated the feeling of his power, the raw, untamed energy that felt so alien to his own body. He walked towards the statue, his footsteps feeling unnaturally loud. The marble knight seemed to stare down at him, its stone eyes judging his inadequacy. He took a deep breath, trying to recall Crollo's lessons. It is not your power, Izuku. It is a tool I have given you. A key. You must learn which door it opens, not simply use it to batter down the wall. He planted his feet, shoulder-width apart, the way Nobunaga had shown him for grounding a sword stance. He placed his hands flat against the cold, smooth flank of the marble horse. He could feel the immense, unyielding weight of it. Just 5%, he thought, his mind racing. 5% should be enough. Control it. Focus the energy into a single, smooth push. Don't let it explode. He closed his eyes. He reached for the roiling ocean of power that resided within him, a tempestuous sea of energy that was not his own. Thin, crackling lines of emerald lightning began to snake across his skin, illuminating the dim entrance. The air grew heavy, humming with raw power. He could feel the familiar, terrifying sensation of his muscles coiling, screaming under a strain they were never meant to endure. He pushed. For a moment, nothing happened. The statue remained stubbornly inert. Having trouble, Squirt? Finks taunted. Deku gritted his teeth, his knuckles turning white. He pushed the percentage up. 7%. A deep groan of stressed stone echoed through the cathedral. The statue began to slide, scraping a deep gouge into the floor. It was working. He just needed to maintain the pressure, to guide it carefully around the doorframe. But the power was like water cupped in his hands. The harder he squeezed to control it, the more it slipped through his fingers. The lightning intensified, crawling up his arms, turning from a gentle green to a furious, almost white, light. His control slipped for a fraction of a second. The 7% spiked to 12. There was a deafening crack. It wasn't the statue. It was him. A wave of unimaginable agony shot up his right arm. The sound of his own radius and ulna snapping in half was sickeningly loud. His push faltered, but the momentum was already there. The colossal statue slid free of the doorway with a final, booming scrape and came to a rest in the nave. Deku crumpled to the ground, cradling his ruined arm. It was bent at an unnatural angle, the bone visibly jutting against the skin. A strangled cry of pain escaped his lips, his vision swimming with black spots. Idiot, a cold voice said. Maki was suddenly kneeling beside him, her expression one of detached annoyance. I told you. You don't have the finesse for delicate work. You are a sledgehammer trying to be a scalpel. Without another word, her hands began to glow with a soft pink aura. She took his mangled arm in her surprisingly strong grip. Deku whimpered, bracing himself. Hold still, she commanded. Her nin threads, finer than hair but stronger than steel, materialized from her fingertips. They phased through his skin, a bizarre, chilling sensation. He watched in a haze of pain as she began her gruesome work. The threads latched onto muscle, tendon, and bone. With precise, deliberate movements, she began to pull, to stitch, to reassemble him from the inside out. The broken ends of his bones were forced back into alignment with a gut-wrenching grate. Torn ligaments were woven back together. It was a miracle of Nin, a beautiful and horrifying display of mastery. And it hurt more than the initial break. You rely on it too much, she said, her eyes focused intently on her work, her voice low and even. This one for all. It's not a part of you. It's a parasite Krallo attached to your soul. Every time you use it like this, it eats away at you. One day, there will be nothing left for me to stitch back together. Deku didn't answer, his teeth clamped shut to keep from screaming. He just focused on her words, the pragmatic concern hidden beneath the layer of cold efficiency. In the twisted reality of the Phantom Troupe, this was the closest thing to kindness he ever received. The memory, raw and unwanted, surfaced with the pain. The stench of refuse and rain-soaked rot was the only air he had ever known. Meteor City, the world's junkyard, was his cradle and his cage. He was a child with no name, just a brand given to him by the other, stronger orphans, Deku. The useless one. In a world where survival depended on strength, cunning, or the awakening of Nen, he had nothing. He couldn't fight, he was a terrible thief, and the mysterious energy that others could wield was a locked door to him. He was huddled in a rusted-out husk of a car, shivering from a fever that had racked his small body for days. He was dying. He knew it with the simple, resigned certainty of a creature that had never been given a reason to live. It was just a matter of time before the cold took him, or one of the city's mutated scrap dogs found him. That was when the man appeared. He moved without a sound, a dark figure against the gray, oppressive sky. He knelt before the car, and his eyes, dark and ancient, met Deku's. The boy didn't feel fear. He felt seen. For the first time in his life, he felt like he wasn't just another piece of trash. You are empty, the man had said, his voice a quiet melody. An empty vessel, yearning to be filled. The world has called you useless. But an empty cup is the most useful thing of all. It can hold anything. The man introduced himself as Krallo. He didn't offer food or medicine. He offered a purpose. He brought the boy to a secluded part of the junkyard, where a book with a strange handprint on the cover lay open on a makeshift pedestal. Krallo explained Nen, the power of the soul, and how Deku's own soul was a closed fist, refusing to open. But I can open it for you, Krallo had whispered, his hand gently resting on Deku's head. I can give you something to fill that emptiness. He spoke of a stolen power, an ability called One for All. He framed its history not as a legacy of heroism, but as a tale of hoarding. For generations, a select few passed this power amongst themselves, believing they alone were worthy of it, that only their narrow definition of good was the correct one. They kept it chained to their ideology. We will liberate it. Krallo performed a ritual Deku didn't understand, his Nin a complex, terrifying tapestry of darkness and light. He pressed his hand to Deku's forehead. The boy felt a searing pain, a feeling like his entire being was being hollowed out, and then overfilled. It was an agony that dwarfed his fever, a spiritual violation that left him screaming and thrashing in the dirt. When it was over, he felt it. A boundless, terrifying ocean of power churning inside him. It was a foreign entity, a violent guest in the home of his body. It is a gift, Krallo said, looking down at the panting, weeping child. And a curse. It will grant you unimaginable strength, but your body is not its true master. It will break you, over and over, until you learn to command it. It will be your trial by fire. Later, in a grimy, candlelit room, another man, his face covered in bandages, held a needle shimmering with Nin. Krallo held Deku's shoulder firmly. All things of value must be marked, Krallo said. We are a body. A single entity with 13 legs. Today, you will become the 14th. The spider does not abandon its own, and you will never be alone again. The needle plunged into his skin, the pain of the tattoo a final, searing seal on the contract he hadn't understood he was making. He wasn't just being saved. He was being claimed. Maki tied off the last invisible thread and pulled her hands away. Done. Don't use it for at least an hour. Deku slowly, gingerly, flexed his fingers. The skin was sore and bruised, but the bones were whole. The pain had subsided to a dull, throbbing ache. "Thank you, Maki," he whispered, his voice hoarse. She just grunted in response, turning and walking away without a backward glance. He sat there for a long time, leaning against the base of the statue he had just moved. He was a part of the spider. He was family. They had saved him, given him a name, even if it was the one that once meant useless, and a power beyond his wildest dreams. They were his world, so why did he always feel like a fractured piece of stained glass, reflecting a light that didn't belong to him? Later, when the activity in the cathedral had died down, and most of the troupe were either asleep or out on their own errands, Crollo found him. The leader moved with a preternatural grace, his footsteps making no sound on the stone floor. He sat down beside Deku, not too close, but within a comfortable distance. "The pain has subsided?" Crollo asked, his eyes on the shattered rose window. "Yes, boss. Maki is very skilled." "She is," Crollo agreed. "She is practical. She sees a problem and fixes it. A valuable trait." He turned his gaze to Deku, and the boy felt pinned by that intelligent, unreadable stare. "You, however, are different. You feel the break more deeply than the others." Deku looked down at his hands. "It's my fault. I lost control." "Control will come with time and practice," Crollo said dismissively. "I am not speaking of your arm. I am speaking of your spirit. You blame yourself for your weakness, but you also mourn the necessity of your strength. It is a fascinating dichotomy." He leaned back slightly, steepling his fingers. "That is your true value to us, Izuku. It is not merely the raw power of one for all. It is the nature of the vessel that contains it. The others, their nin is a reflection of their will, their desires, their malice. It is sharp, selfish, and honed for a purpose. But the power you wield is different. It was born from a desire to save, to protect, to sacrifice. It is a power of utter selflessness." Crollo's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "To have such a pure power in the hands of a thief, to see it used for our freedom, our acquisitions, it is the most beautiful form of irony. It is a testament to the fact that concepts like good and evil are merely cages we build for ourselves. You, my boy, are the proof that any power can be liberated for any purpose." Deku felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. Crollo had a way of taking his deepest insecurities, his most profound conflicts, and reframing them as virtues. He made Deku's weakness feel like a unique strength. He made his internal torture sound like a beautiful song. It was intoxicating. It was manipulative, and Deku, starved for validation his entire life, drank it in like a dying man in a desert. "Your loyalty to the spider is a beautiful thing, Izuku," Crollo continued, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It is unwavering because it is not born of greed or fear, but of gratitude. Never forget that." He stood up, brushing a speck of dust from his coat. "Rest. We have a great task ahead of us." With that, he was gone, melting back into the shadows of his cathedral nest. Deku was left with the ghost of his leader's touch on his shoulder, and the poisonous comfort of his words echoing in his mind. Once he was sure he was alone, Deku reached into a hidden pocket of his trousers and pulled out a small, tattered notebook and a charcoal pencil. It was his one true secret, his only possession that wasn't given to him by the troupe. He flipped through the worn pages. They were filled with sketches. Not of treasure, but of people. His family. There was a detailed drawing of Nobunaga in his meditative stance, with notes, scribbled in the margins, "Enhancer. Focuses aura into his blade and a 4-meter radius N. What is the trigger for its activation? A vow? An emotional state? His swordsmanship is pure, but his nin is a cage he builds around himself." Another page showed Maki, her hands weaving her nin threads. Transmuter. Threads have incredible tensile strength. Can reattach limbs, but also use them as razor-sharp wires for traps or combat. What is their breaking point? She can control them with perfect precision even when not in physical contact. Is there a maximum range? He turned to a new page and began to sketch Crollo, a difficult task as the man's face was so often an impassive mask. He drew the book, The Skill Hunter, resting in his lap. Specialist. The conditions for stealing an ability are complex. He has to see it, ask about it, the user must touch the handprint on the book, all within an hour. But what are the hidden conditions? Is there a limit to how many abilities he can store? Does using them drain more aura than it would for the original user? This was the last remnant of the boy he might have been, the hero-obsessed child who filled notebooks with analysis of pro-heroes. Now, he analyzed the world's most dangerous criminals. He didn't do it to find their weaknesses, to figure out how to defeat them. He did it because he wanted to understand them. It was his way of connecting with the strange, violent, and fiercely loyal people who were his only family. It was his way of making sense of the impossible life he was living. He was so engrossed in his work that he didn't notice the others beginning to file back into the main hall until Uvigen's booming laugh shook the very foundations of the cathedral. Ha! I was getting bored just sitting around. The giant enhancer bellowed, slamming a massive fist into his palm. Time for some real fun. Deku quickly hid his notebook as all 13 active members of the Phantom Troupe gathered before the altar, where Krallo stood waiting. The air crackled with anticipation. Phaeton, Finks, Uvigen, Nobunaga, Franklin, Maki, Pakunada, Shaunark, Shizuku, Kortopi, Benolanov, and Hisoka, the unnerving magician whose predatory gaze always seemed to linger on Deku a second too long, and him. The 14th. Krallo opened his book, not the skill hunter, but a simple leather-bound journal. He scanned a page, and then closed it with a soft snap that commanded absolute silence. Our period of rest is over, he announced, his voice ringing with quiet authority. Our next objective is a prize worthy of the spider's attention. It is a gathering of the world's most decadent filth, a monument to greed where they trade treasures like cattle. He paused, letting his gaze drift over each of them, a general addressing his elite soldiers. We will not be taking just one item. We will not be taking a dozen. A slow, predatory smile touched Krallo's lips. We are going to York News City. And we are going to steal every last item from the entire underground auction. A wave of savage glee rippled through the troupe. Uvigen let out a bloodthirsty roar. Finks grinned, cracking his knuckles again. Shaunark's eyes lit up with childish excitement, but Deku felt none of it. He stood at the back of the group, a small, insignificant figure dwarfed by killers and monsters. All he felt was a cold, coiling dread in the pit of his stomach. York News City, a real, thriving city, full of people. An auction, guarded by mafia, by hunters, by innocents caught in the crossfire. He looked at his right hand, the one Maki had just repaired. It still throbbed with a phantom pain. Krallo had gifted him the power of a hero, and now, he was going to be ordered to use it to bring a city to its knees. The dissonance was a physical weight, threatening to crush him. He was the 14th spider, a leg of the beast, bound by loyalty and a debt he could never repay. And the spider was about to descend upon the unsuspecting world. The transition from the monochromatic desolation of Meteor City and the muted, dusty grandeur of their cathedral hideout to the heart of York News City was a violent assault on the senses. For Izuku Midoriya, it was like being plunged from a silent, dark pool into a raging sea of incandescent light and sound. He had never seen so much life crammed into one place. In Meteor City, life was a scavenger's game, played out in the shadows of junk heaps. Here, life was a performance, a loud, brilliant, chaotic spectacle staged under a canopy of neon signs that painted the rain-slick streets in hues of electric blue, feverish pink, and molten gold. The air, thick with the evening humidity, carried 1,000 smells he couldn't name, the sweet, cloying aroma of roasting nuts from a street vendor, the savory steam of a noodle cart, the sharp perfume of wealthy women, and the acrid bite of vehicle exhaust. It was the smell of a world that was utterly, painfully normal. A world he was here to break. He walked a few steps behind Shaunark and Franklin, trying to make himself small, to disappear into the river of people flowing around them. A child, no older than 7, laughed as he chased a flock of pigeons, his mother watching with a gentle smile. A young couple shared a crepe under a store awning, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of the shop window. These were scenes from a life he had only ever imagined in the vaguest, most abstract terms. They were a foreign language his heart understood but his mind could not translate into his own reality. Amazing, isn't it? Shaunark chirped, turning around to walk backwards, a wide, guileless grin on his face. He held a high-tech smartphone, its screen reflecting the city's dazzling lights. It's like a real-life RPG hub world. So many NPCs, so many potential quest lines. And the loot. He practically vibrated with excitement. Deku flinched at the term NPCs. To Shalnark, these people with their laughter and their lives were just pixels on a screen, background characters in his grand game. To Deku, they were a painful reminder of everything he wasn't. There are so many people, Deku muttered, his gaze darting around nervously. The density is strategically problematic. Too many variables. Too much potential for collateral damage. Franklin, a mountain of a man whose silence was more intimidating than any threat, grunted. They are not our concern. They are scenery. Stay focused on the objective. The objective. It was a cold, hard word that was supposed to act as a shield against the messy reality of their work. But Deku's shield was full of holes. He felt every stare from the passing crowd, every snippet of conversation, every burst of laughter. He felt like a ghost haunting a festival, invisible and yet painfully out of place. He pulled the collar of his simple dark jacket higher, a futile attempt to hide the spider lurking on his back, a brand that marked him as an enemy of this vibrant, living world. Their temporary base was a high-end hotel suite, procured through Troupe's unsettling ability to replicate master keys. It was a place of sterile luxury, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of the sprawling metropolis. While the others went about their preparations, Finks methodically rapping his knuckles, Nobunaga sharpening his blade, Pakunada sitting in quiet contemplation, Deku was drawn to the window. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass, looking down at the city 20 stories below. The cars were glittering insects, the people a swarm of ants, their individual lives and dramas reduced to microscopic movements. From up here, it was easier to believe they were just scenery. It was easier to think of the city not as a collection of homes, but as a single, massive structure. A thing to be broken. Quite the view, huh? Deku jumped, startled. Shalnark had come up beside him, holding out a sleek black phone. Here, he said, pressing it into Deku's hand. This one's for you. It's linked to our private network. All the mission parameters are on it. Consider it your new party member. Deku fumbled with the device. It felt alien in his calloused hands. I don't really need one. I can remember the plan. Nah, you gotta have one. It's part of the fun. Shalnark leaned against the window, his smile never faltering. Besides, your role is super important. You're our area of effect specialist. He tapped his own phone, and a holographic map of a fortified block of buildings appeared in the air between them. A large, opulent structure in the center was highlighted in red. The cemetery building, the site of the underground auction. Okay, so here's the gameplay loop, Shalnark explained, his tone bright and cheerful, as if he were explaining the rules of a board game. The auction is a high-level dungeon, crawling with mafia mobs, level 30 grunts, maybe a few level 50 mini-bosses. Yurvijin is our main tank. He's going to make a frontal assault right here, he pointed, to draw aggro. Big, loud, and messy. Standard Yuvo. While the guards are focused on him, Shalnark continued, swiping his finger across the map. Phaeton, Maki, Franklin, and Nobunaga will form the main DPS party, clearing out the trash mobs on the inside. Paku and I will handle intel and support. Shizuku is our magical vacuum cleaner for the loot. Simple, right? Deku stared at the map, his throat dry. Clearing out the trash mobs. He knew what that meant. My role, Deku said softly, prompting him. Ah, yes. Your quest is the most explosive. Shalnark zoomed in on the map, highlighting a series of points around the main building. You, my friend, are the opening cinematic. Your job is twofold. First, diversion. While Yuvo is knocking on the front door, you'll be hitting these key structural points on the surrounding, empty buildings. We need loud noises, collapsing facades, dust clouds, basically, maximum chaos. Make the whole district look like it's under a random demolition project gone wrong. It'll confuse their reinforcements and scramble their communications. He looked at Deku, his eyes sparkling. But the second part is more important. The escape route. See this old sewer main here? He highlighted a thick line running beneath a seemingly solid street. It's been sealed for 50 years. The city planners don't even have it on modern blueprints. We need it open. The cap is 20 feet of reinforced concrete. That's your final target. Once the auction items are secured, we all exfiltrate through there. You're the key that opens our exit. Deku stared at the plan. It was brilliant. It was ruthless. And his role was perfectly tailored to him. He was being asked to destroy buildings, not people. To open a path, not to block one with bodies. It was Krallo's genius at work again, using his power in a way that skirted the edges of his conscience. A task that required his immense, destructive force without forcing him to directly stain his hands with blood. He should have been relieved. Instead, a cold dread settled deeper into his bones. He was still a vital cog in a machine of slaughter. A cinematic explosion is meaningless without the violent movie that follows. Don't look so glum. Shaunard clapped him on the shoulder, misinterpreting his silence as performance anxiety. It's a huge responsibility, but the boss trusts you. Just think of it as a high-score challenge. Cause as much property damage as you can without getting a game over. Shaunard then bounded off to talk with Yuvijin, his laughter echoing in the sterile suite. Deku was left alone by the window, the cold phone in his hand, the holographic map of his designated path of destruction glowing ominously in the darkening room. He looked back down at the city, at the endless stream of lights. He wondered how many of them would be extinguished by the time the sun rose. Was there a different life for him down there? A world where a power like his could be used to build things up instead of tearing them down. The thought was a fleeting, painful fantasy, a ghost of a dream he'd been forced to bury long ago in the scrap heaps of Meteor City. The hour of the overture arrived. The night air was thick and humid, carrying the distant promise of a storm. The troupe moved through the city's underbelly with the silent, coordinated grace of a pack of wolves. They used rooftops and shadowed alleys, flowing through the urban landscape like a dark river. Deku, with his enhanced speed, easily kept pace, his footfalls barely making a sound. They took their positions. From his perch on a water tower several blocks away from the cemetery building, Deku had a clear view of the entire operation zone. He could see Yuvijin, a barely contained explosion of muscle and malice, grinning as he cracked his knuckles in a dark alley across the street from the main entrance. He could sense, more than see, the others melting into the shadows around the perimeter. His new phone buzzed in his pocket. A single message from Shaunard, "Showtime." Smiley face. Deku's heart hammered against his ribs. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the smell of rust and rainwater filling his lungs. Just a mission, he told himself, the mantra beginning its desperate loop in his mind. No people. Just walls. Just stone. Just the objective. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling. He clenched them into fists, trying to will the shaking to stop. This was for the troupe. For Krallo, who had saved him. For Maki, who stitched him back together. For all of them, his only family. This was the price of his belonging. In the distance, the show began. Yuvijin stepped out of the alley and roared, a sound so primal and full of killing intent that it seemed to shake the very air. He slammed his fist into the pavement, and the ground erupted as if struck by a meteor. The first screams of panic from the street were quickly followed by the staccato bark of gunfire, as the Mafia guards opened fire. The overture had begun. That was his cue. Deku closed his eyes and summoned the power. One for all, full cowling, 8%. Emerald lightning erupted around his body, a crackling green aura that illuminated him against the night sky. The familiar, agonizing strain began, his muscles screaming under the pressure, but it was a controlled burn now, a pain he was learning to endure. He pushed off the water tower, and the world became a blur. He was a green comet streaking through the night. He moved with a speed that defied physics, a phantom leaping from rooftop to rooftop. The wind roared in his ears, whipping his hair back from his face. For a fleeting second, the sheer exhilaration of the movement was intoxicating, a taste of absolute freedom. Then he remembered why he was moving, and the feeling curdled in his stomach. First target, the corner of a derelict textile warehouse. According to Shaunard's map, it was structurally unsound and scheduled for demolition in a month. He landed on the roof, the concrete cracking under the force of his impact. He didn't hesitate. He drew back his leg, the green energy concentrating in his foot. Manchester smash! His axe kick connected with the roof's edge. The resulting shockwave was immense. The entire corner of the 5-story building groaned, sagged, and then collapsed into the street below with a deafening roar of grinding metal and pulverized brick. A massive cloud of dust billowed into the air, obscuring the view and adding to the growing chaos. He was gone before the first chunk of debris hit the ground. Second target, a communications antenna atop an office building. He ran straight up the side of the building, his feet finding purchase on windowsills and ledges, defying gravity. Reaching the top, he saw the antenna, a spindly metal tower bristling with dishes and transmitters. He grabbed its base, his muscles screaming as he channeled more power. With a guttural yell, he tore it from its moorings and hurled it into the empty lot next door, where it landed with a cacophony of screeching, twisted metal. The district's private communication lines were severed. He moved like a force of nature, a living earthquake. A swift punch to a load-bearing pillar here, a targeted shockwave to a weak foundation there. He was a green blur of destruction, a phantom artist painting a masterpiece of chaos across the urban canvas. With every strike, he squeezed his eyes shut for the moment of impact, a child's futile attempt to not see the consequences of his own actions. He focused on Shalnark's instructions, on the cold geometry of the map, on anything but the reality of what he was doing. The screams from the direction of the cemetery building were a distant, horrifying soundtrack to his work. He told himself they had nothing to do with him. He was just a diversion. Finally, only one objective remained. The escape route. He landed silently in a deserted alleyway, the designated spot on Shalnark's map. The air was thick with the smell of damp concrete and decay. Before him was a solid-looking section of the street, marked only by a large, circular manhole cover that had clearly been welded shut decades ago. 20 feet of reinforced concrete, Shalnark had said. This required more than a simple smash. It required a focused, overwhelming application of force. He planted his feet, taking a low stance. He drew his right arm back, the sleeve of his jacket tearing as his biceps swelled with a terrifying amount of power. The green lightning around him intensified, arcing and snapping furiously. 20%, he thought, his teeth gritted against the building agony. It's going to break. But I have to do it in one shot. Delaware. He began to whisper, the wind already starting to whip around his fist. Stop! Please don't move! The voice, young and cracking with fear, cut through his concentration like a shard of glass. Deku's eyes snapped open. Standing at the mouth of the alley, not 20 feet away, was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 18, barely older than Deku himself. He wore the ill-fitting black suit of a low-level mafia enforcer, and he held a pistol in his hands, but it trembled so badly it was a miracle he hadn't dropped it. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a terror that was achingly familiar to Deku. It was the terror of the weak facing the overwhelmingly strong. The terror he himself had lived with for his entire childhood. The young guard had likely been posted on the outer perimeter and, hearing the chaos, had come to investigate, stumbling upon Deku by sheer bad luck. Deku froze. The crackling green energy around his arm flickered and dimmed. This wasn't part of the plan. Shalnark had said these surrounding blocks were empty, secured. A miscalculation. A variable. A human being. I am warning you. The guard stammered, trying to steady his aim. I will shoot. Identify yourself. Deku's mind raced. He could disarm him in a thousandth of a second. He could knock him out before he even registered the movement. He could simply ignore him, finish his task, and be gone. But all he could see were those terrified eyes. This wasn't a monster like Yuvajin or a killer like Phaeton. This was a kid, probably in debt to the mob, forced into a job he wasn't cut out for, trying to be brave. He saw himself. He slowly lowered his arm, raising his empty hands in a placating gesture. Just go, Deku said, his voice strained. Leave. You didn't see anything. Get out of here. Please. The guard stared, confused by the plea. He saw the immense power radiating from the green-haired boy, heard the sounds of battle raging blocks away, and was now being told to run away? What are you? The guard asked, his fear warring with his duty. Deku's innate heroism, the deeply buried, brutally suppressed core of his being, screamed at him. Save him. Tell him to run. Protect him. The troope's conditioning, the voice of Krallo, of Nobunaga, of his survival, whispered a colder truth. He is an obstacle. Remove him. He is a witness. Silence him. He hesitated. For one critical, fatal second, Izuka Midoriya was paralyzed by the ghost of the hero he could have been. A shadow moved behind the guard. It was utterly silent. There was a soft shing of a blade being drawn, followed by a wet, guttural sound. The guard's eyes went wide, not with fear, but with blank surprise. A thin red line appeared across his throat. The trembling pistol clattered to the ground. The boy crumpled like a puppet with its strings cut, his life spilling out onto the grimy pavement. Standing over the body was Nobunaga, his Yato already sliding back into its sheath, not a single drop of blood on its pristine blade. He hadn't even broken his stride. He stopped beside Deku, his gaze hard and cold as stone. Deku stared at the body, at the spreading pool of dark blood, his mind a roaring void of white noise. He felt a phantom warmth on his own face, as if he'd been spattered by the boy's lifeblood. You were ordered to secure this position, Nobunaga said, his voice dangerously calm. This is not secure. He was just a kid, Deku whispered, his voice trembling. He wasn't a threat. He was a witness. He had a weapon. He stood between you and your objective. That makes him a threat, Nobunaga stated, as if explaining the simplest of truths. He took a step closer, his presence immense, suffocating. He looked down at Deku, his eyes filled not with anger, but with a profound, chilling disappointment. Listen to me, boy. In our world, there is no room for maybes. There is no time for pity. You act or you die. Your hesitation, that single second you spent thinking, that is a luxury we cannot afford. In a real fight, that second would get you killed. It would get me killed. It would endanger the spider. He pointed a finger at the dead guard. His death is on you as much as it is on my blade. You hesitated, so I had to act. I corrected your mistake. Nobunaga's words were a physical blow. Deku stumbled back, his legs weak. He was right. His mercy had been pointless. All it had done was force one of his family members to kill in his stead. He had tried to keep his hands clean, and in doing so, had only passed the filth on to another. He wasn't just complicit. He was the cause. Remember this lesson, Deku, Nobunaga said, his voice a low growl. Hesitation is death. For you, and for the spider. Now, finish your job. With that, Nobunaga turned and melted back into the shadows, leaving Deku alone with the cooling body and the crushing weight of his failure. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Deku's own ragged breathing. The emerald light around him was gone. He felt cold, empty. He looked at the dead boy, at the life that had been extinguished because of his weakness. The world of laughter and crepes and chasing pigeons felt a million miles away. It was a world he could never, ever be a part of. He was a monster, just like the rest of them. The only difference was that he was fool enough to cry about it. Tears streamed down his face, silent and hot. But they changed nothing. The objective remained. He turned back to the sealed manhole cover, his expression now a blank, shattered mask. He raised his arm again. This time, there was no hesitation. The green lightning that engulfed his limb was no longer vibrant. It was a sickly, furious green, crackling with self-loathing. He poured everything into it. His pain, his grief, his rage at himself, one for all. 100%. He didn't shout the name of the attack. He didn't need to. He simply flicked his finger. The air itself seemed to shatter. An invisible cannonball of pure kinetic force slammed into the street. The sound was not an explosion. It was a deafening, instantaneous crack, as if the sky itself had broken. The reinforced concrete and welded steel didn't stand a chance. They were pulverized into dust, revealing a gaping, dark maw leading down into the earth. The mission was complete. Deku fell to his knees, his right arm a mangled ruin of shattered bone and torn muscle, the index finger bent at a sickening, purple angle. The pain was excruciating, a clean, sharp agony that was almost a relief from the deeper, messier wound in his soul. He didn't cry out. He just knelt in the ruins he had created, the body of the boy he had failed lying just a few feet away, and let the pain wash over him. The overture was over. And Izuku Midoriya had taken his first, irrevocable step into the darkness. The Yorknu of the day was a different beast from the neon-drenched creature of the night. Under the flat, gray light of an overcast sky, the city felt more real, its glamour stripped away to reveal the concrete and steel bones beneath. The ceaseless river of people still flowed, but their purpose seemed different, less about pleasure and more about the mundane business of living. For Deku, the daylight offered no comfort. It only made the shadows, both in the alleyways and in his own soul, feel darker and deeper by contrast. His right arm, expertly mended by Maki, was nestled in a simple black sling against his chest. The bones were set, the muscles rethreaded, but a deep, phantom ache remained. It was a constant, physical reminder of his failure, of the dead guard's surprised eyes, of Nobunaga's cold, corrective lesson. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes he saw the alley, heard the whisper of the blade, smelled the coppery scent of blood on the damp air. He had tried to eat the breakfast Shizuku had silently placed in front of him, but the food tasted like ash in his mouth. He and Shizuku were on a reconnaissance mission, though its purpose felt deceptively simple. Their task was to blend in, to walk the city streets and gather ambient information, to be the spider's eyes and ears. Specifically, they were looking for any unusual chatter, any heightened security, any sign that the Mafia knew more than they were letting on. Crollo believed that true intelligence wasn't found in encrypted messages, but in the subtle shifts in a city's rhythm. Shizuku was the perfect partner for such a task. Her presence was strangely calming in its utter lack of emotional static. She walked beside him with a placid expression, her large glasses reflecting the bustling streetscape, her mind seemingly 1,000 miles away. She wasn't ignoring him, she simply existed, her thoughts operating on a different, more literal plane. "The architecture here is inefficient," she commented suddenly, her voice flat as she pointed a thumb at a building adorned with ornate, non-functional gargoyles. "Those carvings serve no structural purpose, they just collect dust. Blinky would have trouble cleaning them." Deku managed a weak, non-committal hum in response. He was trying to focus on the mission, to analyze the flow of traffic, the body language of the police officers on the corners, but his mind kept betraying him. His gaze would snag on a boy about his age laughing with friends, and a cold knot would tighten in his stomach. He saw a young couple holding hands and felt a profound, aching loneliness that was so intense it was almost a physical pain. He was a foreign body, a virus walking through a healthy organism, and he could feel the system rejecting him on a fundamental level. "We should investigate the library," Shizuku said, changing topics with no transition. "The one on the corner of Joro Avenue. They might have a first edition of the Carnation's Petal. I've been looking for it." "Is that relevant to the mission?" Deku asked, his voice barely a whisper. "No," Shizuku replied without a hint of shame. "But we are here. It would be efficient to check." Her simple, self-contained logic was so alien to his own tangled mess of guilt and anxiety that it was almost jarring. To her, this was just another day at work, with the possibility of a personal errand on the side. To him, it felt like walking through his own personal hell. They turned a corner onto a wide plaza, where a large fountain depicted rearing bronze horses. A crowd had gathered, and the sound of shouting and laughter drew their attention. In the center of the plaza, a makeshift arm wrestling table had been set up. People were placing bets, cheering on the contestants. Deku's first instinct was to turn away, to avoid the crowd, to retreat back into the anonymous flow of the sidewalk. But Shizuku had stopped, her head cocked with mild curiosity. Trapped by her stillness, Deku had no choice but to stop as well. And that's when he saw them. There were two boys at the heart of the commotion. One was a powerhouse, a man with the physique of a bodybuilder who was offering cash prizes to anyone who could beat him. The other two were challengers. One had startlingly white, fluffy hair and sharp, clever blue eyes that seemed to be taking in everything, analyzing angles and weaknesses with a practiced, predatory ease. The other boy was like a piece of the sun that had fallen to earth. He had spiky black hair with green tips and wore a simple green tunic. But it wasn't his appearance that was so striking. It was the aura he exuded. It was an energy so pure, so vibrant, so full of unadulterated life and determination that Deku felt it like a physical warmth against his own cold, coiled-up dread. The boy was brimming with a guileless, joyful potential that felt more powerful than any Deku had ever sensed. It was bright. So blindingly, painfully bright. The white-haired boy Killua, Deku would later learn, was giving his friend advice. Don't try to overpower him head-on, Gon. Use your wrist. It's about leverage, not just raw strength. The bright boy, Gon, just grinned, a wide, infectious smile. Got it. But I still think I can win with strength. Deku watched, mesmerized. He had seen strength his whole life. Yuvijin's brutish, explosive power. Nobunaga's disciplined, deadly force. His own destructive, self-immolating energy. But this was different. Gon's strength seemed to come from a place of pure, uncomplicated will. There was no malice in it, no desperation, no hidden agenda. It was just the joy of testing himself, of pushing his limits. Gon placed his elbow on the table, and for a moment, his eyes flickered away from his opponent. They swept across the crowd and, for a fraction of a second, they met Deku's. Something shifted in the air. Deku felt a jolt, as if he touched a live wire. Gon's smile didn't falter, but a look of intense curiosity entered his eyes. He saw something. Deku didn't know what, but he felt utterly, terrifyingly transparent. The arm wrestling match began. Gon was clearly outmatched in terms of sheer muscle mass, but he fought with a tenacity that was astonishing, his entire body straining, a faint shimmer of aura enveloping his arm. Deku, the analyst, couldn't help but be impressed. An enhancer, he catalogued mentally, the old habit dying hard. Incredibly talented. His control is raw, but his potential output is immense. He's a natural. In the end, Gon lost, but he did so with a laugh, shaking his opponent's hand with genuine admiration. Killua rolled his eyes but was smiling, a subtle, fond expression on his face. They were just two friends, having an adventure. Deku felt a pang of longing so sharp it made him gasp. He quickly turned to Shizuku. We should go. There's nothing for us here. Okay, Shizuku said agreeably, but as they turned to leave, a voice called out, clear and friendly. Hey! Wait up! Deku froze, every muscle in his body going rigid. He knew who it was without even looking. He squeezed his eyes shut. Don't be me. Please don't be talking to me. He turned slowly. Gon was jogging towards them, a wide, curious grin on his face. Killua followed a few paces behind, his hands in his pockets, his posture deceptively relaxed but his eyes sharp and analytical, radiating suspicion. Hi! Gon said, stopping in front of them. He completely ignored Shizuku and looked directly at Deku. His hazel eyes were wide and honest, and they seemed to see right through the layers of fear and self-loathing Deku wrapped around himself like a shroud. I felt you from over there, Gon said, his tone one of simple, factual observation, as if he were commenting on the weather. Your power, it's really, really huge. It's all coiled up, like a giant spring. But... He tilted his head, his expression turning serious, his brow furrowing in genuine concern. Why does it feel so sad? The world stopped. The noise of the plaza, the fountain, the chatter of the crowd, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. Deku's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the boy, his mind a complete blank. Sad? No one in the troupe spoke of sadness. Sadness was a weakness. A vulnerability. An indulgence. Emotions were tools, rage to fuel a fight, fear to control a target, cold detachment to perform a task. But simple, unadorned sadness? It had no place in their world. And for this stranger, this bright, shining boy, to not only sense it but to ask about it with such open, guileless sincerity, it was like a surgeon's scalpel slicing through scar tissue to touch a raw, unhealed nerve. From behind Gon, Killua's eyes narrowed. His perception was different from Gon's. He couldn't feel sadness in Nin. He felt danger, and the boy in front of him, the one with the nervous posture and the freckled face, was screaming danger on a level that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The amount of raw aura leaking from him, even unintentionally, was monstrous. It was on par with his brother Illumi, or even Hisoka. It was the power of a top-tier professional, a monster in human skin, and yet, the kid looked like he was about to cry. He was fidgeting, avoiding eye contact, his shoulders hunched in a defensive curl. His gaze darted around as if looking for an escape route. Every signal his trained assassin's senses were screaming was being flatly contradicted by his own eyes. The dissonance was deeply unsettling. Who was this guy? I don't know what you're talking about, Deku stammered, his voice coming out as a choke squeak. He took a half-step back. You must have me confused with someone else. We have to go. He grabbed Shizuku's arm, his grip surprisingly tight. Let's go. Now, why? Shizuku asked, blinking at him from behind her glasses. He only asked a question. He's weird. Let's go, Deku insisted, his voice laced with a panic he couldn't control. He practically dragged her away, not daring to look back. He could feel Gon's confused, concerned gaze on his back. He could feel Killua's sharp, suspicious stare. He didn't stop until they had rounded two corners and were lost in the anonymity of a different street. He leaned against the wall, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He was breathing heavily, as if he'd just run a marathon. Are you broken again? Shizuku asked, poking his good arm. You're making a strange noise. I'm fine, Deku rasped, pushing himself off the wall. Let's just keep moving. Away from there. He had just been grazed by the light, and it had burned him. That boy Gon represented a path he could never walk, a person he could never be. The encounter had stirred something in him, a dormant, dangerous thing he had thought long dead, hope. And hope, for a member of the Phantom Troupe, was the most lethal poison of all. Later that evening, the troupe gathered again in the hotel suite. The atmosphere was tense. The heist had been a success. The mafia was in chaos. The auction's security was a joke, and the path to their prize was clear. But Uvijin had not returned. He had charged after the chain user and had not been heard from since. Shalnirk was frantically typing on his laptop, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a strained focus. I'm tracking his phone, but the signal is dead. Last known location was in a ravine just outside the city limits. The chain user, Nobunaga, growled, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He captured Yuvo. I'm sure of it. Krallo stood by the window, his expression calm and unreadable as he surveyed the city lights. Patience. We lack information. Acting rashly will only endanger him further. Shalnirk, find out everything you can about the bodyguards hired by the No-Strayed family. The chain user is among them. Troupe, use your ability on the items we did acquire. See if they've been tracked. His orders were crisp, logical, and betrayed no panic. But Deku could feel the shift in the room's energy. The spider was a creature that prided itself on its untouchable status. For one of its legs to be captured was not just a logistical problem. It was an insult. Suddenly, Shalnirk's head snapped up. Boss. I've got something. Not Uvijin, but a lead. The No-Strayed bodyguards have a network of informants. According to a source I just hacked, 2 of them have been trying to get information on us. They were spotted in the plaza today, asking questions. I've got their phone signals. He brought up a map on the large monitor. 2 blinking dots appeared, moving through a downtown district. The description matches the 2 who captured one of our new recruits in the arm wrestling scam earlier. Deku's blood ran cold. He knew, with a sickening certainty, who those 2 dots were. Krallo turned from the window. They may know something about the chain user's abilities or location. We cannot afford to overlook any possibility. They are to be captured. Alive. For interrogation. His dark eyes scanned the room, landing on Deku. Deku. Your speed is unmatched. Thinks you go with him. Provide heavier firepower if needed. Intercept them. Do not fail. Finks grinned, a hard, feral expression. With pleasure. Deku's mind was a maelstrom. Capture them. Gon and Killua. The boy who had seen his sadness. The boy whose friend had radiated a light so bright it had scorched him. He had to hunt them. He had to bring them back here, to this room full of killers, to be interrogated by Pakunada, or worse. He remembered Nobunaga's words, cold and sharp as his blade. Hesitation is death. This was an order from the boss himself. To disobey was unthinkable. It was treason. It was suicide. He nodded numbly, his face a pale mask. Understood. He and Finks left the suite and descended to the street. Finks was practically buzzing with violent energy. All right, Squirt. Shalnark is feeding us their real-time location. They're heading into the commercial district. We'll cut them off in that labyrinth of alleys by the old market. You'll use your speed to get ahead and block their path. I'll come in from behind and pincer them. Easy. Deku didn't respond. He just walked, his mind racing. What could he do? There was no way out. He was a tool, a weapon pointed by Krallo's hand, and he was being pointed directly at the only glimmer of light he had seen in years. As they got closer, Finks grunted. All right, this is it. They're about to enter the alleyway up ahead. Go. Now. Box them in. Deku took a deep breath. One for all, full cowling, 10%. The familiar green lightning enveloped him. He shot forward, a silent, emerald blur. The world dissolved into streaks of color. He moved so fast that the rain, which had just begun to fall, seemed to hang suspended in the air. In less than 3 seconds he had traversed 3 city blocks and arrived at the far end of the designated alleyway. He landed softly, his feet barely making a sound on the wet pavement. The alley was long and narrow, hemmed in by the towering brick walls of old warehouses. The only light came from the neon glow of the main street at the far end, casting long, distorted shadows. He could hear footsteps approaching. 2 sets. He stood there, a silhouette against the distant light, waiting. His heart felt like a block of ice in his chest. Gon and Killua rounded the corner and skidded to a halt, their eyes widening in shock. Killua immediately dropped into a defensive crouch, his hands morphing, his fingernails elongating into sharp claws. His face was a mask of cold, professional fury, but Gon's reaction was different. He stared, his expression not of fear, but of shocked recognition and confusion. It's you, he breathed, the rain plastering his spiky hair to his forehead. The guy from the plaza. The scene was a horrifying echo of the night before. An alleyway. An interception. And Deku, the monster tasked with blocking the path. He could almost smell the phantom scent of the young guard's blood on the pavement. Behind the 2 boys, he could sense Finks approaching, blocking their only escape. They were trapped. Why are you doing this? Gon asked, his voice filled with genuine hurt. I thought you were. He trailed off, unable to finish. Good? Sad? Like me? The unspoken words hung in the air, heavier than the rain. Deku's fists clenched at his sides, the knuckles of his good hand turning white. He looked at them. At Killua, ready to fight and die to protect his friend, a mirror of the Troupe's own fierce loyalty, and at Gon. Gon, who was still looking at him not as a monster, but as a person, a puzzle he couldn't solve, and in Gon's eyes, fierce and determined even in the face of overwhelming power, Deku saw it. The reflection. Not of who he was, but of who he was supposed to be, the bright, shining image of a hero, standing firm against the darkness. The dream he had nurtured in the scrapyard, the one Krallo had twisted into this monstrous parody. He was standing on the wrong side of the alley. He was the villain in his own childhood fantasy. Nobunaga's voice echoed in his head. Hesitation is death. He made his choice. He would not hesitate. He would act. Get ready, Gon. Killua hissed, sensing the shift in Deku's aura. He's coming. Deku's body exploded with green light, the energy surging to a level that made the very air vibrate. He raised his mangled right arm, the fingers still crooked and purple from his last 100% attack. He aimed it directly at them. The pressure building in his hand was immense, the pain a distant, unimportant signal. He could feel Finks closing in behind them, ready for the capture. He had one chance. He saw the flicker of fear in Killua's eyes, but saw only unwavering resolve in Gon's. This is all I can do, he thought, a silent apology directed at the boy who had shown him kindness. So please, run. He brought his thumb back and flicked it forward. Delaware smash. Air Force. A cannonball of compressed air, visible for a split second as a distortion in the rain, erupted from his fingertip. It didn't fly towards Gon and Killua. It flew at the brick wall directly to their left. The impact was cataclysmic. The sound was a deafening boom that echoed through the district like a thunderclap. The century-old brick wall didn't just crumble. It exploded outwards in a shower of dust and fragmented masonry, creating a massive, gaping hole that led into the parallel alley. The shockwave from the blast kicked up a torrential cloud of dust and debris, completely obscuring vision. "What the?" Finks yelled from the other end of the alley, blinded by the sudden chaos. "Go! Now!" Killua screamed, grabbing Gon's arm and pulling him through the newly created exit without a second's hesitation. He was a trained assassin. He knew a gift horse when he saw one, no matter how bizarre. Gon stumbled but followed, casting one last, confused look back into the swirling dust cloud where their attacker stood. By the time the dust began to settle, they were gone. Finks stormed down the alley, his face a mask of pure fury. He appeared through the dissipating haze to find Deku on one knee, his right arm limp at his side, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "What the hell was that, you useless brat?" Finks roared, grabbing Deku by the front of his jacket and hauling him to his feet. "You had them. They were trapped. And you missed?" Deku met his furious gaze, his own expression a carefully constructed mask of pain and exhaustion. "They were faster than I anticipated," he gasped out, the lie feeling flimsy and pathetic even to his own ears. "My blast. I lost control for a second. The recoil, it gave them an opening." He motioned to his ruined arm, to the fingers that were now even more gruesomely bent. He was using his own greatest weakness, his lack of control, as his shield. It was the only excuse they might possibly believe. Finks stared at him, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. He wanted to call him a liar, to beat the truth out of him, but he looked at the sheer destruction, the hole blown clean through a solid wall, and at Deku's genuinely mangled hand. The kid's power was notoriously unstable. It was just plausible enough to be true. He shoved Deku away in disgust. "Useless," he spat, the old insult carrying a fresh sting. "You're a cannon with a cracked barrel. The boss put his trust in you, and you failed. Let's go." "I'm not looking forward to telling him this." Finks turned and stomped back the way he came, leaving Deku alone in the ruined alley. The rain began to fall harder, washing away the dust, plastering his green hair to his face. He looked at the gaping hole in the wall, a stark, physical testament to his betrayal. He had done it. He had saved them. He had defied a direct order from Krallo Lucifer. He had protected the light from the darkness he inhabited. He felt no triumph. No relief. Only a cold, terrifying certainty. He had just betrayed his family, the only home he had ever known, for two strangers who represented a dream he could never reach. He had drawn a line. And he knew, with chilling clarity, that the spider would not tolerate a broken thread for long. The silence in the hotel suite was a living entity. It was heavy and suffocating, thick with unspoken accusations and the sharp, metallic tang of disappointment. It was a silence that felt louder and more threatening than any of Yuvijan's roars or Finks's shouted curses. Deku stood in the center of the room, head bowed, the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes pressing down on him like a physical force. He was the focal point of the room's oppressive stillness, a lightning rod for its collective frustration. Finks had already delivered his report, his words clipped and laced with contempt. He described the perfect trap, the cornered targets, and then Deku's misfire. He'd called him a clumsy, uncontrollable brat whose power was more a liability than an asset. He'd painted a picture of incompetence, and Deku had allowed every stroke of the brush, offering no defense, his own silence a tacit admission of failure. He kept his gaze fixed on a swirl in the pattern of the expensive carpet, counting the threads, a desperate, mundane task to anchor his spiraling thoughts. "You miss," Phaeton said, his voice a sibilant hiss from the shadowy corner where he was methodically cleaning his sword. The words weren't a question, they were a judgment, cold and sharp as the blade he held. "A target 10 meters away. With a power that can level a building." "You missed." Deku flinched as if struck. "My control, it slipped." He mumbled to the floor, the lie feeling thinner and more brittle with each repetition. "The recoil from the last mission, my arm wasn't fully healed. It threw off my aim." "Excuses?" Nobunaga growled from his seated position by the wall, his arms crossed over his chest. His disapproval was a palpable wave of pressure. He had warned Deku about the cost of hesitation, and now, here was the proof. This failure, in Nobunaga's eyes, was a direct consequence of the weakness he had witnessed in the alley the night before. Maybe the little runt just got scared. Yuvijin's voice boomed. To everyone's surprise, he wasn't angry. He had returned mere minutes before Deku and Finks, bruised, bloodied, but very much alive, having been freed by Shalnirk's cunning and his own indomitable will. Now, he was sitting on the floor, allowing Shizuku to use Blinky to vacuum the dirt and grime from his wounds, a bizarrely domestic scene of monstrous recovery. Those kids were hunters, weren't they? Maybe he's never faced a real ninjuser before. Got a case of the jitters. Yuvijin laughed, a deep, rumbling sound. He saw it not as betrayal, but as cowardice, which, to him, was almost endearing in its patheticness. The condescending dismissal was, in some ways, worse than the accusations. It relegated him to the status of a frightened child, a pet who had failed to perform a trick. He could feel his face flush with a mixture of shame and a simmering, unfamiliar anger. "I was not scared," he said, his voice quiet but firm, his eyes finally lifting from the floor to meet Yuvijin's gaze. "Then what was it?" Finks stepped forward, his fists clenched. "Are you calling me a liar? I say you let them go. I say you had them dead to rights and you chose to miss. That's not just incompetence, that's treason." The word hung in the air, heavy and venomous. Treason. The ultimate sin for a member of the troupe, a body that demanded absolute loyalty from all its legs. "Do you have proof of this accusation, Finks?" Pakunada's calm, measured voice cut through the tension. She sat on the sofa, her gaze analytical, her ability to read the memories of others making her the de facto arbiter of truth within the group. "The proof is that they got away," Finks shot back, jabbing a finger at Deku. "Look at him. He can't even look us in the eye. He's hiding something." The pressure was becoming unbearable. Deku could feel his carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. Pakunada's piercing stare felt like it was peeling back the layers of his skull, searching for the truth he was so desperately trying to conceal. Enough. The single word, spoken by Krallo, was not loud, but it silenced the room instantly. All debate, all accusation, all tension ceased, sucked into the vacuum of his authority. He had been standing by the window, an impassive observer to the entire scene. Now he turned, and the full weight of his attention fell upon Deku. His dark eyes were not angry or disappointed. They were filled with a serene, unnerving curiosity, like a scholar examining a fascinating but unpredictable new specimen. "A disagreement has arisen," Krallo said, his voice smooth as polished obsidian. "Finks believes your failure was an act of will. Yuvijin believes it was an act of fear. You claim it was a failure of control." 3 different interpretations of a single event. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. "It seems the simplest way to resolve this would be to test the theories." A chill snaked its way down Deku's spine. He knew what was coming. "Phaeton." "Finks," Krallo said calmly. "Challenge him." A savage, anticipatory grin spread across Phaeton's face. He sheathed his sword with a decisive click and rose to his feet. Finks cracked his knuckles, the sound like a death rattle in the silent room. "A fight to test his loyalty," Finks snarled. "To see if he has the stomach to fight his own family. If he fights back, he proves he's got the grit. If he holds back, he proves he's a traitor." It was a perfect trap, a classic piece of Meteor City logic. Any action Deku took would be an admission of something. To fight was to be brutal. To refuse was to be a coward, or worse, a conspirator. Deku's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, for an ally. Yuvijin watched with the detached interest of someone about to see a good brawl. Nobunaga's expression was hard, unyielding. Shalnirk looked on with a troubled, almost clinical curiosity. Franklin remained a stony, unreadable mountain. Maki, leaning against the far wall, watched him with her usual cool, pragmatic gaze, but he saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not pity, but perhaps a warning. This was a test he could not afford to fail. Finks didn't wait for a signal. He lunged, his movements a blur of speed and power. Deku's instincts, honed by 100 brutal training sessions, screamed at him. He activated full cowling at 5%, the green lightning a faint crackle around his limbs, and dodged to the side, Finks's fist whistling past his ear, the displaced air striking his cheek like a physical blow. He created distance, his mind racing. He couldn't win. Not against two of the Troupe's most proficient and bloodthirsty fighters. Phaeton was impossibly fast, a master swordsman whose abilities were a terrifying mystery to most. Finks was a top-tier enhancer whose power grew the more he wounded his arm. A direct confrontation was suicide, but he couldn't refuse to fight. That would be an admission of guilt. He was trapped. Phaeton was on him in the next instant, appearing from his blind spot as if from nowhere, the tip of his concealed blade aimed at Deku's throat. Deku threw himself backwards, tumbling over a sofa, the sword's tip slicing a thin, bloodless line across the fabric of his shirt. He landed on his feet, his heart pounding. They weren't trying to kill him, not yet. They were toying with him, testing his reactions, pushing him. "Fight back, traitor!" Finks roared, already charging again. Deku dodged and weaved, using his superior speed to stay just out of reach. He was a frantic green blur, bouncing off walls and furniture, the hotel suite becoming his cage. He didn't throw a single punch. He didn't attempt a single kick. His power was for evasion only, a tool for survival, not aggression. This, he quickly realized, was its own kind of answer. His refusal to engage, his purely defensive posture, was infuriating them. "Is this all you can do? Run like a scared rabbit?" Phaeton taunted, his movements becoming faster, his strikes closer, forcing Deku into more desperate evasions. "I won't fight you!" Deku yelled, his voice strained as he ducked under a wide, sweeping kick from Finks. "You're my family!" The word, meant as a plea, acted as gasoline on a fire. "Family doesn't betray the spider!" Finks bellowed, finally managing to corner him against the large window overlooking the city. "Family doesn't hesitate! Family doesn't fail!" He drew his arm back, his muscles coiling. He wasn't winding it up, not yet, but even a basic punch from him could shatter bone. Phaeton appeared at Deku's side, his sword a hair's breadth from his ribs. There was nowhere left to run. Deku squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable impact, for the familiar agony of broken bones. "That is enough!" Again, Crollo's voice cut through the violence, and the world froze. Finks's fist stopped an inch from Deku's face. Phaeton's sword remained poised, unmoving. The absolute, unquestioning nature of their obedience to their leader was, in its own way, as terrifying as their bloodlust. Deku opened his eyes, panting, his body trembling with adrenaline and fear. Crollo walked calmly into the center of the standoff, placing himself between Deku and his attackers. He looked not at Finks or Phaeton, but at Deku, his expression still one of calm, academic inquiry. "You refuse to fight them," Crollo stated. "Even when your loyalty is questioned. Even when your life is threatened. You will not raise a hand against a member of the Troupe. Is that correct?" Deku could only nod, his throat too tight to speak. Crollo was silent for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. Deku felt as if his entire soul was being weighed and measured on a divine scale. "Interesting," Crollo said softly. He turned his head slightly to address Finks. "Your test is inconclusive. His refusal to fight could be interpreted as a sign of his unwavering loyalty to his family. A dog, no matter how much you provoke it, will not bite the hand of its master." The analogy was demeaning, but it was also a shield. Crollo was offering a different interpretation, a way out. Finks lowered his fist, grumbling but accepting the boss's logic. Phaeton retracted his sword with a frustrated sigh. The immediate threat had passed, but the tension in the room remained thick and cloying. "However," Crollo continued, his attention returning to Deku, "that still leaves the matter of your failure. I am not interested in excuses about control or fear. I want your reasoning. You are an analyst, Izuku. You observe. You process. You see patterns others miss. You had those two boys cornered. You possess the power to obliterate this entire city block, and yet you failed to capture them. Give me your analysis." Why? This was the true test. Not a test of strength, but of ideology. Krallo didn't want an apology. He wanted a justification, a strategic rationale that he could accept. Deku's mind raced, searching for the right words, the correct lie that would sound like the truth. He couldn't say, because they were good. He couldn't say, because he saw the sadness in me. Those were truths from a different world, a language no one in this room would understand. He had to speak their language. He took a deep breath, forcing his voice to remain steady. He channeled the analytical persona he adopted when studying treasure, detaching himself from the emotional core of the issue. They weren't the primary target, Deku began, the words tasting like poison. Our objective is the chain user. He is the only immediate threat to the spider. Capturing those two boys, Gon and Killua, would have been a secondary achievement. But in observing them, I sensed potential. This, at least, was true. He had sensed their potential, just not in the way he was about to frame it. Their nin is unrefined but incredibly potent, he continued, his muttering habit surfacing as he fell into the rhythm of analysis. Especially the one named Gon. His aura is vast, on par with some of the strongest enhancers I've ever seen. But it's wild, untamed. To capture them now would be like picking a fruit that is still green. They are not yet at their peak. They are not yet a worthy prize. He saw a flicker of interest in Krallo's eyes and pressed on, emboldened. Furthermore, their connection to the chain user is likely tangential. They are associates, perhaps temporary allies. Using our resources to capture and interrogate them now yields a low probability of high-value intelligence. However, if we allow them to continue, if we let them grow, they will inevitably be drawn deeper into the conflict with the chain user. They will become better sources of information. They will become stronger. He finally looked up, meeting Krallo's gaze directly. They are an investment. By letting them go, I wasn't failing the mission. I was allowing a potentially valuable asset to mature. It was a calculated risk. To capture them now would be a waste of their potential, both as a source of information and as a future challenge. He had taken his true, sentimental reasons and twisted them into a cold, pragmatic, and slightly arrogant calculation. He had framed his act of mercy as an act of strategic foresight, a language that Krallo, the master strategist and collector of rare things, would understand. The room was silent. Finks looked confused and angry, the logic too convoluted for his straightforward worldview. But Krallo looked intrigued. A slow, thoughtful smile touched his lips. An investment, he mused, savoring the word. To see potential not just in an object's value, but in a person's future growth, and to weigh that against the immediate needs of the present, a fascinating perspective. It is unorthodox. It is arrogant. And it goes against my direct order. Deku's blood ran cold. But, Krallo continued, his voice dropping, your analysis is not without merit. The logic is sound, even if the conclusion is debatable. He turned away from Deku, addressing the entire room. The matter is closed. Deku acted on his own initiative. The result was a failure to complete the assigned task, but his reasoning has been noted. There will be no further punishment. A collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through some members of the group. The crisis was averted. But Deku felt no relief. He had survived, but he had done so by becoming a more convincing liar, by twisting his own burgeoning morality into the grotesque shape of their philosophy. He had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had taught him how to speak its language. As the tension in the room finally dissipated and the others began to break off into their own conversations, a new presence made itself known at his side. My. A soft, drawling voice purred near his ear. What a delicious performance. Deku jumped, turning to find Hisoka leaning against the wall, a deck of cards held fanned out in one hand. The magician's amber eyes were alight with an unsettling, predatory glee. He had watched the entire confrontation with the rapt attention of a connoisseur savoring a complex wine. To see such raw, untamed power, that destructive force you hide behind those frightened eyes, Hisoka whispered, his gaze intense. And yet you refuse to use it. You hold it back, you let it break you from the inside out, like a beautiful fruit that refuses to ripen. It's absolutely intoxicating. Hisoka took a step closer, his aura flaring for a moment, a thick, cloying mixture of bloodlust and amusement. Deku felt an instinctual urge to recoil, the same way a small animal would from a coiled snake. That power you have is wasted on these little games of loyalty and these tasks of demolition. Hisoka continued, his voice a seductive murmur. It's a power meant for a true fight, a dance of death and ecstasy where everything is on the line. One day, when you have ripened into a truly magnificent fruit, I will be there to pluck you. He licked his lips, a gesture that was both theatrical and deeply menacing. I look forward to the day you stop holding back. The day you finally break. The magician chuckled to himself and sauntered away, leaving Deku feeling violated, as if Hisoka's words had left a slimy trail on his very soul. Hisoka hadn't just seen his power, he had seen his conflict, his internal struggle, and found it to be the most exciting part. He wasn't just a target for Hisoka's bloodlust, he was a source of entertainment. Deku retreated to a corner of the room, sinking down onto the floor and pulling his knees to his chest. He felt more isolated than ever before. He was trapped in a web of conflicting loyalties. He was a piece in Crawler's intellectual games, a target of Phaeton and Finks's aggression, a source of amusement for Hisoka, and a subject of Maki's pragmatic concern. He had just lied to save his life, and, in doing so, had tied himself even more tightly to the spider. He had tried to protect the light, but all he had done was learn how to better thrive in the dark. From across the room, Maki caught his eye. She had been watching his exchange with Hisoka, her expression unreadable. She gave him a short, sharp nod, then looked away. It wasn't a gesture of comfort or friendship. It was a warning. A stark, simple message that he understood completely. The head may find you interesting, but the body will tear you apart if you prove to be a weak link. And there are more dangerous things in this room than just the head and the body. She was telling him to be careful of Hisoka. She was telling him that Crawler's protection was conditional. She was telling him that he was walking a razor's edge, and he had just taken another step. He was surrounded by his family, and he had never felt more alone. The aftermath of Deku's trial left a strange and subtle residue in the air of the hotel suite. The immediate tension had dissolved, but it had been replaced by a quiet, watchful uncertainty. Deku felt it in the way Finks's gaze lingered on him a moment too long, in the unnerving silence from Nobunaga, and in the way Crawler would occasionally look at him with that same serene, analytical curiosity, as if he were a puzzle the leader was still in the process of solving. Deku had survived, but he had marked himself as different, a variable in an equation that prized predictability. He retreated further into himself, a ghost haunting the edges of the group, his notebook his only confidant. He was sketching a profile of Franklin, trying to understand the mechanics of his nin emitters, when the atmosphere in the room shattered. The shift was instantaneous and violent. It began with Shalnuk, who had been glued to his laptop for hours, a low hum of activity in the corner of the room. Suddenly, he let out a strangled cry, a sound of such genuine shock and horror that every head in the suite snapped towards him. His usual cheerful, boyish face was ashen, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at his screen. "No!" he whispered, his fingers trembling as they hovered over the keyboard. "No, that's not possible. What is it?" Maki demanded, her voice sharp, already sensing the gravity of the situation. Shalnuk looked up, his expression a ruin of his usual good cheer. He swallowed hard, his voice cracking as he spoke the words that would ignite the world. "It's Yuvo. A source in the Mafia just posted it on the dark web. There was a duel. In the Gordo Desert." He took a shuddering breath. "Yuvigin is dead." For a single, impossibly long second, there was absolute silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the hotel's air conditioning. It was a silence of pure, uncomprehending shock. Yuvigin? Dead? The idea was absurd, a logical fallacy. Yuvigin was their indestructible spearhead, their living battering ram. He was a force of nature, a creature of such overwhelming power and vitality that the concept of his death seemed like a poorly written piece of fiction. Then the silence broke, and the room erupted. "Lies!" The roar came from Nobunaga. He shot to his feet, his chair crashing to the floor behind him. His face was a mask of contorted fury and denial, his eyes blazing. "It's a trick! Mafia disinformation to try and scare us. Yuvo can't be killed. Not by some piece of trash with a few chains. The source is reliable. Shalnark said, his voice trembling but firm. They've posted a picture. It's him. There's no mistake. I don't believe it! Nobunaga bellowed, his aura flaring around him, a visible, shimmering heat of raw, untamed rage. He stormed over to Shalnark's laptop, shoving the smaller man aside to stare at the screen. Deku watched, his own heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He saw Nobunaga's broad shoulders heave, his entire body trembling with a force that had nothing to do with Nen. The samurai, the disciplined master of the blade who had lectured Deku on the necessity of cold, emotionless action, was coming apart at the seams. He slammed his fist down on the table, the expensive wood cracking under the force of the blow. Who? Nobunaga's voice was a low, guttural growl, a sound of pure, animalistic grief. Who did this? The chain user? Shalnark whispered. The name, once a simple descriptor, was now a curse. This was the moment that changed everything for Deku. He had seen the troupe as a collection of powerful, self-serving individuals, bound together by mutual interest and the authority of their leader. He had understood their loyalty in a purely functional sense. The legs obey the head, the parts serve the whole. He had never, in his most detailed analysis, accounted for this raw, unadulterated, human grief. He saw Finks, his face pale beneath his usual scowl, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists, his body vibrating with a need for violence so intense it was almost a physical presence in the room. He saw Phaeton, his face hidden in the collar of his coat, but the aura leaking from him was colder and sharper than Deku had ever felt it, a promise of exquisite torture for the one responsible. He saw Shizuku, her usual placid expression gone, her mouth a thin, hard line, her eyes, for once, sharply focused and filled with a quiet, burning anger. Even Franklin, the silent giant, had a look of murderous sorrow on his face. These weren't just colleagues who had lost an asset. This was a family that had lost a brother. Deku had been an orphan in Meteor City, a place where the concept of family was a dangerous liability, a weakness to be exploited. His only family had been the troupe, but he had always held a part of himself back, seeing their bond as a twisted parody of the real thing. But what he was witnessing now was undeniably real. It was a bond forged in blood and survival, a fierce, feral love that was as much a part of them as their cruelty and their greed. He looked at Nobunaga, who was now just staring at the wall, his rage having collapsed into a hollow, frightening emptiness. He saw the tears welling in the samurai's eyes, cutting clean paths through the grime on his face. This was the same man who had killed a terrified young guard without a flicker of emotion, who had chided Deku for his weakness. And here he was, weeping for his fallen friend. The contradiction was a physical blow to Deku's understanding of the world. He had tried to categorize them, to place them in a neat box labeled villains. But they refused to fit. They were murderers and thieves, yes. They were monsters who had brought untold suffering to the world. But they were also capable of this profound loyalty, this devastating grief. The confusion was so overwhelming that it was nauseating. How could he feel empathy for these people? How could he look at Nobunaga's pain and feel a pang of genuine sympathy? These were the people who had stolen his life, who had twisted him into a tool of destruction. And yet, in this moment of shared loss, he felt a strange, unwelcome sense of belonging. He was a part of this grieving family. The thought was terrifying. Krallo had remained silent through the entire outburst. He stood apart from the rest, his expression as placid as ever. But his eyes, Deku noted, were fixed on Nobunaga, and they held a deep, ancient coldness. It was the gaze of a leader whose family had been wounded, a shepherd whose flock had been attacked by a wolf. "We will not act rashly," Krallo said, his voice cutting through the grief-stricken haze. It wasn't a comforting tone, it was a command. Revenge is a dish best served cold, but it must be served intelligently. We still know nothing about this chain user, save for the fact that he is powerful enough to have killed Uvijin. So we do nothing? Nobunaga roared, spinning to face him. Yuvo is dead, and we sit here and talk? We do not sit. We hunt, Krallo corrected, his voice hardening slightly. But we hunt with our minds first, our fists second. To charge in blindly, as Uvijin did, is to dishonor his memory by repeating his mistake. We will find this man. We will learn his abilities. We will understand his weaknesses. And then, we will tear him apart, piece by piece. His life is forfeit. The only question is the method of its collection. There was no comfort in his words, only the promise of a cold, methodical, and absolute vengeance. It was this promise that seemed to rally the group, pulling them back from the brink of their chaotic grief and focusing them into a single, sharp point of collective will. Shalnirk, Krallo commanded. Pool all our resources. I want to know everything about the No-Strayed family and their bodyguards. Financial records, known associates, mission histories. Cross-reference everything with known user databases. I want a complete profile. Pakunada, he continued. You will be on standby. The moment we capture anyone associated with him, we will extract every last memory from their minds. Franklin, Nobunaga, Finks, Phaeton. You are the hunting party. The moment we have a location, you will move. His orders were precise, his strategy forming in real time. He was turning their grief into a weapon, sharpening it into a blade of pure, focused hatred. And as he spoke, Deku felt a familiar, nervous energy begin to build within him. It was the anxiety of being useless, of having no role, the old fear from his Meteor City days. What could he do? He couldn't fight like them. He wasn't an interrogator or a hacker. He began to mutter, the old habit surfacing as a coping mechanism, his mind latching onto the problem as a way to distance himself from the overwhelming emotions in the room. The chain user, he whispered to himself, his eyes unfocused. Chains are conjuration, but to hold Yuvijin, an enhancer of his level, the chains would need an immense amount of aura, or a powerful condition placed upon them. A vow and restriction. The stronger the condition, the stronger the ability. He only targets the troupe. That's probably the condition. My chains are unbreakable, but only when used against a member of the Phantom Troupe. That would explain it. That's a powerful restriction. It would multiply his aura output exponentially. He started pacing, his muttering growing faster. But how did he know Yuvijin was alone? He forced a duel. That implies a high level of confidence. Or a specific ability to isolate a target. Manipulation? Maybe a secondary ability. He's a specialist then? No, that's too rare. More likely a conjurer with an affinity for manipulation. Or a mission for long-range chain attacks. He has to be a survivor of one of our past missions. That's the only explanation for a vendetta this specific. The Kurta clan? They were known for their scarlet eyes, which were coveted by collectors. We did take those eyes, didn't we? Yes, they're in the vault. So he's a Kurta. The last one. His entire power, his entire life, is fueled by revenge. He's not a hunter. He's an avenger. Izuku. Krallo's voice was soft, but it cut through Deku's frantic monologue like a scalpel. Deku stopped pacing, his eyes snapping into focus. The entire room was staring at him. He hadn't realized he'd been speaking so loudly. A hot flush of embarrassment washed over him, but Krallo wasn't looking at him with annoyance. He was looking at him with that same intense, scholarly interest from the day before. Your analysis, Krallo said, a hint of admiration in his tone. It's sound. You've constructed a viable working theory from almost no data. A vow and restriction focus solely on the spider, a survivor seeking vengeance. It is the most logical conclusion. Deku stared, stunned into silence. He had just been muttering, processing his thoughts out loud. He hadn't expected anyone to be listening, let alone the boss himself. Krallo walked over to a large map of your new city that was spread out on a table. Your mind works differently from the others, Izuku. They see a target. You see a system. A set of rules. We have been trying to find the man. You have been trying to understand his power. That is a far more valuable pursuit. He beckoned Deku over. Come. You will work with me and Shalnirk. You will be part of the strategic team. Your perspective is useful. Deku felt a dizzying mix of emotions. Pride, at being acknowledged by Krallo, at being given a purpose. And a deep, coiling guilt. He was being praised for using his analytical mind, the one part of him that still felt like his own, to help these killers plan a murder. He was being drawn deeper into their world, not as their weapon, but as their strategist. He was helping them hunt the man who was, by any objective measure, the hero of this story. He walked over to the table, his legs feeling strangely heavy. He was now officially part of the hunt, and in that moment, helping this grieving, monstrous family find its vengeance felt like the only right thing to do. His morality was not just blurring, it was being actively, willingly erased and redrawn to fit the shape of the spider. The next several hours were a blur of intense, focused activity. Deku found himself at the heart of the troupe's operational planning, a position that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Working alongside Krallo and Shalnuk, he sifted through mountains of data, his mind sharp and clear, the analytical task a welcome refuge from his emotional turmoil. He pointed out inconsistencies in the no-strayed family's security patrols, suggesting potential blind spots. He analyzed the known abilities of the other bodyguards, theorizing how the chain user might use them as a support network. His hero analyses, once a childish hobby, had become a tool for hunting one. They finally got a break. A confirmed sighting. The chain user and another bodyguard, a tall woman with glasses, were seen entering a small, nondescript hotel in the city's business district. "That's it," Nobunaga said, his voice a low growl. He was already on his feet, his hand on his sword. "It could be a trap," Maki warned, ever the pragmatist. "Let it be," Nobunaga spat. "I will walk into any trap to get my hands on him." "We will not be reckless," Krallo stated. "We will observe first. Maki, you have the best senses for this. Take Deku. Your abilities complement each other. You can sense presences, he can analyze movements and patterns from a distance. Go to the location. Do not engage. Simply watch. Report everything you see." Deku's heart skipped a beat. A field mission. With Maki. To observe the man he had just been analyzing. The man whose entire existence was dedicated to destroying the people he now called family. The hotel was a drab, gray building, indistinguishable from a dozen others on the same street. Maki and Deku took up a position on the roof of an adjacent building, concealed behind a large air-conditioning unit. The night was cool and clear, the city lights painting the sky a hazy orange. Maki sat in perfect stillness, her eyes closed, her neck extended like an invisible net, sensing the flow of life within the hotel. "There are 34 people inside," she murmured. "Most are civilians. Their auras are dim. But on the 4th floor, northeast corner, there are 2 bright ones. One is calm, controlled. The other is a furnace." Deku knew which one was the furnace. He focused his own senses, not on their nin, but on the physical world. He watched the windows, the entrance, the flow of traffic on the street below. He was looking for patterns, for anything out of the ordinary. After nearly an hour of silent observation, there was movement. The door to the hotel lobby opened, and 2 figures stepped out. Even from this distance, Deku recognized them instantly. It was the chain user and his female companion. Kurapika. He was slender, with blonde hair and dressed in the distinctive tabard of his clan. But it wasn't his appearance that struck Deku. It was what he felt. As Kurapika stepped onto the street, his aura, which had been controlled and contained within the building, flared for a brief moment. It wasn't an aggressive display. It was more like an involuntary leak, a crack in a dam holding back an ocean of pure, unadulterated hatred. Deku physically recoiled, a gasp catching in his throat. He had never felt anything like it. It wasn't the hot, explosive rage of Nobunaga or Yuvijin. It wasn't the cold, sadistic pleasure of Phaeton, or the predatory amusement of Hisoka. This was different. It was a hatred so cold and so absolute that it had become a thing of perfect, crystalline purity. It was the chilling, unwavering focus of a glacier, an unstoppable force of nature that existed for the sole purpose of grinding its opposition into dust. It was the nun of a man who had burned away every other part of himself, joy, love, fear, doubt, leaving only the single, diamond-hard conviction of his revenge. It was beautiful in its horrifying simplicity, and in that moment of chilling clarity, Deku realized the most terrifying truth of all. The feeling, that absolute, all-consuming need for vengeance, that sense of a life given over to a single, violent purpose, it was an exact mirror of the emotion that was currently radiating from Nobunaga, from Finks, From every member of the Phantom Troupe, Kurapika wasn't their opposite. He was their reflection. He was the hero of his own story, the avenger of his fallen people. The troupe were the avengers of their fallen brother. They were two sides of the same blood-soaked coin, two families locked in a spiral of grief and retribution. There were no heroes or villains in this fight. There were only the grieving and the dead, and the ones who were about to join them. Deku looked at the avenger standing on the street below, a lone figure against the backdrop of the indifferent city. Then he thought of Nobunaga, back in the hotel, nursing his own bottomless grief. He had been so confused by his empathy for these monsters. But now he understood. He wasn't empathizing with monsters. He was empathizing with people who had lost their family, because their opponent was a boy who had also lost his. He was standing on one side of a bridge of bodies, and Kurapika was on the other, and they were both about to set it on fire. His morality didn't just feel blurred anymore. It felt completely, utterly irrelevant. All that mattered now was family. And he had chosen his. "Maki," he said, his voice quiet but steady, his eyes still locked on the figure below. "Let's report back to the boss. I think I know how to draw him out."